it's really important to take a step back and try to understand what exactly do I want out of this. You know, things are going to get complicated. It's going to get a little messy. But what is my end goal and outcome from this? My end goal and outcome is to make sure that I don't burn this relationship, you know, as we kind of navigate and go through this.
I try to be a very timely person, especially from a professional capacity. For me, deadlines and timing is so important to me, right? So I've had to have some conversations with some of the guys in different departments here, where it's like, hey, I need you. One of my boundaries is that you need to have crystal clear communication with me. That is a boundary. That is something that I absolutely need from you. Do not lie. Do not try to give me mush, right? And have me try and dissect it. Just be crystal clear with me, right? And if that's not a boundary, if that's not a standard that you can commit to, then this ain't really gonna work.
Yeah, venture hustles, life is really what you make it. Building up your brand is whatever you create it. Really ain't no limit. You just gotta love it. Working day and night, it's all about the venture hustle. Hey, venture hustles. Time to take it to the next level. Let's go.
This is the Venture Hustles podcast. I'm your co-host Saj, and I've got Mr. Jack here with me, my other co-host. And today, we're taking a slight detour from our usual tech and entrepreneurship discussions to address something that is very deep, personal, and impactful, right? We're talking about navigating away from harmful bonds, relationships, whether in our personal lives or professional lives. Our circles can profoundly affect our mental well-being and overall growth. So, if you've ever felt trapped or drained in a relationship, today's episode might be just what you need.
Love that.
Now, before we dive in, hit that like button, subscribe, turn on the noto bell. It's just one click for you, but it would mean the world for us. To us.
Love that.
So, do it.
Love that. Love that. Interesting topic for today. Super important. There will be minor overlaps from some of the previous episodes that we've done, but I thought we thought this would be a good episode to do because it is so important to kind of directly address these things and talk about it more at length. So as we start to kick it off, right, navigating away from harmful bonds, toxic relationships, what is a toxic relationship, or how can you recognize a toxic relationship? What are the signs? Different contributors to that toxic relationship. What does it look like to cut that off? Healing and recovery to make sure that, that experience, that not good experience that you've had in the past doesn't affect your future relationships. So
if you're surrounded by bums,
you love that. You love that clip, don't you? Yeah, I'm sure you do.
I love that clip. I got a lot of laughs on that clip.
I'm sure.
I mean, it goes best funny. We talked about this in bits and pieces in one of our previous episodes.
Yeah.
But we're kind of like honing into that because it plays a really big part of your mental, of your energy levels, being able to perform at the highest level, making sure you're not affected by any side quests that are negative.
Yeah, your confidence levels, the belief you have in yourself and your ability.
Yes.
It's all a result.
Yeah, so let's dive into this, right? So first off, let's talk about personal boundaries, right? The importance of establishing and maintaining boundaries in these relationships, and how this can be a very useful, powerful tool.
Yeah.
In avoiding harmful situations.
Yeah.
Right. So, Jack,
Saj,
let's get right into it. Right. So, how has setting clear boundaries influenced your personal and professional relationships?
It's everything. I mean, the boundaries that you set for people that you interact with on a daily basis, that's pretty much the structure of ultimately what every relationship would be, in my opinion. If for example, if you let people walk all over you, say what they want to you, that's what everyone will do. Whatever you let happen is what will happen each and every time. You know what I mean? So, for me, boundaries create respect, but boundaries also create like expectations. And so we always want to make sure that those things are followed, for yourself. And one of the most important things, like for me, is not being afraid to vocalize these boundaries, because it's not always like super personal, or it's not always intentional for someone to cross a boundary, so you have to be super vocal, although sometimes it can be, it's intentional, but a lot of times it's not. And, it's not a bad thing that person did that, because they did it unknowingly. But it would be a worse thing if you didn't say anything about it, especially if you disliked it or it made you feel, a negative way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I agree with you. I think it sets the tone.
Yeah, it sure does. It sure does. I mean, for you, like, what have been like some effective like coping mechanisms or support systems that you've found valuable in regards to this?
In regards to setting boundaries, personal boundaries, coping mechanisms. I would say, I don't know. I would just say that it's my goal with every relationship is being very crystal clear. And it always gets a little awkward when I'm dealing with someone that is outside of the normal realm. Like someone that's a little erratic, someone that's a little
makes you feel uneasy, not sure what they're gonna do, kind of thing.
For sure, someone that puts you out of your comfort zone. Puts you out of your comfort zone box of what you're used to seeing in other people. That's always very interesting to me. It's a I look at it as a challenge, especially if I have to build a relationship with them. So for me, it's more so, how do I navigate around this, and how do I make sure that this person understands that there are rules in this relationship that you have to follow. There are boundaries that you have to absolutely abide by. Yeah. Because if you're going to live in my world, you're going to have to live by my boundaries. So that's just how it is. You have to set standards for yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely. You fall by your standards.
Yes.
Yeah.
When do you think, if you could share a time that you had to firmly uphold your boundaries, and what was the outcome of that? Like, if you could think of an example.
A time that I had to firmly hold up my boundaries. I think, there's been a lot of times in my professional career where I've had to vocalize what my boundaries were in regards to how people speak to me. Especially in the professional like arena. That stuff is super important to me personally. Yeah. And it's one of those conversations, depending on who you're speaking with, whether, let's say, it's a superior or even if it's, like your teammate of some sort. It's not an easy conversation to have. Sometimes it could feel very weird and awkward, especially depending on how the person responds to what you're saying. But there are conversations that need to happen, and for me, in 99% of cases, it's worked out great. And the people or the person I've spoken with respected what I was saying, understood what I was saying, and it's been pretty fruitful.
I'll give an example. Can you think of one?
I think I've had a couple of conversations with like some of the guys here, specifically, some of our team members, where it's like, hey, I need you to be able to, I try to be a very timely person, especially from a professional capacity. For me, deadlines and timing is so important to me. Right. So I've had to have, some conversations with, some of the guys in different departments here, where it's like, hey, I need you. One of my boundaries is that you need to have crystal clear communication with me. That is a boundary. That is something that I absolutely need from you. Do not lie. Do not try to give me mush, right, and have me try and dissect it. Just be crystal clear with me, right? And if that's not a boundary, if that's not a standard that you can commit to, then this ain't really gonna work.
Yeah, I think people take a lot of people take advantage of you being good, or just you being nice,
Yes.
and start twisting situations
Yeah.
and taking advantage of that. So I don't know, man. I think it's a tricky world to be in, and I think the earlier you can set the tone,
Yeah.
the earlier you can set the boundaries of these are the rules of the world, the jungle you're in right now.
Yeah, I mean,
that's just how it is.
I would absolutely agree. I mean, I think also it depends on the kind of person you're dealing with. A lot. You should never take niceness as a weakness or kindness as a weakness. However, sometimes you just have to have that conversation, and
Yep.
it is what it is. And
yeah, I mean, in a professional setting, we're talking about identifying, being preventative, identifying, and navigating within the realm of harmful, difficult, toxic bonds, right? Relationships. It's not just like, okay, it's toxic, let's cut them. But there's also preventative measures. There's also identifying how to stay ahead of that.
Well, even in like a professional capacity, sometimes, like let's say, for me personally, like if it's a more personal relationship, if it's family, a little bit tougher. But let's say it's a friend, it's easier to get the scissors out, chop, chop. But from a professional capacity and family, sometimes it can be more difficult. You can't just take the scissor out. It's a little bit more, complex than that. So that's why, even again,
I think
it's that much. It's so imperative.
Question for you, because I've seen you in a lot of different scenarios, right?
Yeah.
We work together. We do a lot of stuff together, right? We've known each other for years, and I think that I want to see your take on this.
Sure.
What advice or what feedback would you give someone struggling to establish boundaries?
Okay.
Without feeling guilty.
Without feeling guilty?
Yeah, because like right now, I think that's what I would think.
Yeah.
Would be one of the biggest things that kind of stops someone
to
be able to establish clear rules, boundaries, right? It's just like, I'm feeling like this person's going to think differently of me.
Yeah.
Or they're going to think I'm being an asshole.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think like number one, like for me, I'd always do my best to think very objectively.
Yeah.
So like in regards to advice, my thing is first this. If you have someone that is being toxic towards you or not respecting, your boundaries in a certain capacity, for me, I'm thinking to myself, okay, why are they doing this? Is this intentional or is it unintentional?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Now, outside of that, the vice is a lot of that. The only reason you're going to feel guilty is number one, if you don't really believe what you're saying. And then number two is if because ultimately, like for me, if you're going to feel guilty, it probably has to do with like, you don't want this person to be mad at you and you don't want this person to, think differently of you in a negative way. But if you can approach this properly, it's not like you're going to get super personal with them. We're going to start going at this person in a negative light. It's like, hey, Saj, that you're a great friend of mine, and we've known each other for years. I love you, buddy. But like at the end of the day, these certain things cannot happen anymore, because when these certain things happen, this is how I feel and this is how it affects me, so on and so forth. So I think just kind of being very clear about, when they do XYZ, how it makes you feel. And if that person cares about you, they respect what you're saying, they respect you, they're going to be very, open to that and change what they're doing.
1,000,000% agree. And I think on a professional side, I say this all the time. You hear me say this across the halls all the time. There are ways where you can deliver the message without being an asshole.
For sure.
And it can be received well.
Yeah.
It can be stern. It can be effective. It can establish the boundaries. I've had to do something like this very recently.
Yeah.
Without diving into the details. But the reality is, it's completely possible. It's just all about your approach. And it's all about how you position it and how you word it. And what your tone is, your body language. Sometimes I get heated, and when me and you talk about like other situations or whatever it is, and you're like, hey man, this is a better approach, and it's good. Maybe bounce off your ideas if you're dealing with things in a professional environment with someone that's a little bit more informal. There's just so many different ways where you can be able to set that. Like, and without rambling on too much, I think that I've had closed family members, like for me, that have come to me and said, hey, you're an employer. I want your take on this? I want your take on this. I want to address X, Y, and Z situation with my boss and my this and that. how do I do this? And 9 out of 10 times, I'm already I detect that they're already thinking about the negatives, the guilt, you know, but they're not understanding that there are ways to be able to do that without feeling guilty. You know what I'm saying? So
I mean, absolutely. And to kind of build on that is like for me, and you've told me this many times, is like depending on the situation, like I personally on like a default, I can be very black and white.
Yes.
Where it's like, listen, we've reviewed this already. What is the problem? What is the problem? And the reason why I say that is because in certain situations there is a time and place to be what I just said, where it's like, yo, what are we doing here? You know, this isn't what we discussed. It's not this, blah, 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 X, Y, Z. But there's also times where it's like, okay, talk to me, you know, and to be a little bit more comforting, changing the tone and, you know, the approach, you know, being on the side of the spectrum.
Yes.
Now, we've kind of discussed having those, you know, kinds of conversations very briefly.
Yeah.
How do we get there? What are some things that are some indicators that you need to have, you know, this kind of conversation with a professional, you know, member, professional person that you deal with, professional relationship, or maybe more of a personal relationship? You know, what do you think some signs are from your side?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think
important,
you know, being able to identify the markers and just different pivot points in your relationships is really important. I mean, what are we talking about? There's a number of different scenarios, right? Sure. How do we get there? It could be, let's take an example of friends working together on a project, you know?
Okay.
You have to understand that in a scenario like that, there's an underlying stress factor there that can be a big reason why your relationship can crumble.
Detrimental to it, yeah.
And I think the biggest thing that to address there is, regardless of the nature of your relationship with whoever you're dealing with, whether in a personal or professional environment, it's really important to take a step back and try to understand, what exactly do I want out of this? You know, things are going to get complicated. It's going to get a little messy, but what is my end goal and outcome from this? My end goal and outcome is to make sure that I don't burn this relationship, you know, as we kind of navigate and go through this. So that's for me, that's how I approach things. And I can, very, very good example for us, you know, without diving into details, we're dealing with a potential business deal right now, that with someone that's from a personal connection, right? And navigating around that. And it's also like both me and this person is thinking, we don't want to burn this relationship that we have, that we're dealing with. Like, we already know what the outcome is. We've addressed it vocally, and then everything else kind of centers around that. And I think the same thing applies in everything. You know, whether if you're married or you're in a relationship with someone that's long term, and there's a dynamic shift change, like let's say you're in a long term relationship, now your girl moves in another state, and now that dynamic is going to affect everything else that happens. It's just so many different things. I think the signs are understanding that there are going to be outside factors that are going to play a major role in this relationship, and you being able to address it and stay ahead of it.
Okay.
You know? I don't know. What do you think? What do you think some subtle signs you believe people overlook in unhealthy relationships? Like, if you want to get into the macro,
I think
details.
Okay. I think for me, some signs are like white lies.
Sure.
You know, someone's just telling you like small white lies that in grand scheme of things don't mean nothing. But for me, eventually they will mean something. Like, that's one of the biggest signs on, like, personally, of a relationship that's kind of trending towards it being toxic. Even if, like, they're super fun, I get it. Yeah. But again, it always progresses bigger and bigger and bigger.
Okay.
I think other than excuses, yes.
Accountability.
I was going to say, you know, things are revolving around like trust and like your word, you know, kind of thing, where it's like, hey man, I need you to pick me up. You know, I need you to do XYZ for me. And
I mean,
they commit, and then you're there left stranded.
It's following through, man. It's just, it's kind of like all part of that process.
Now, something to look through. I apologize. because on that note, everything we're saying, I think a lot of times people recognize a lot of times, but I think, and even for me, what had happened or what happens is when you address, why didn't you XYZ or how come XYZ, they let that moment and the words this person says to them dictate, okay, you know what? It's done now. At the end of the day, words don't mean anything. Your actions do.
Yeah.
Every single time.
I mean, one of the biggest thing that bothers me as a person is when people are not self-aware. And that's when I can get a little short. And I don't like that. And I think that's probably my biggest ick, man. Like, if I really think about this, like, legitimately, when I'm dealing with anybody that's not self-aware, that doesn't have that social awareness of, like, I just jacked up and that I need to be able to tell you that you jacked up, and that just defeats the purpose. Yeah. But it's also, like, there's a fine line of, like, you thinking you're always right or you thinking the other person's not being self-aware. I'm fully aware of that. Sure. But I like to think that I'm a pretty self-aware person. Like, if I drop the ball on something, I approach it. Like, if and you've seen this in several scenarios, like where I know if I've dropped the ball in our relationship and I've, like, let's say, been out of line in certain cases, I'll own up to it. And in some cases I won't, because maybe it doesn't click with me. But 9 out of 10 times my goal is to always own up to it. Right? Would you agree to that? But that's the thing, though. I want the same from others. Yes. You know what I'm saying?
You have to. That's what makes a good relationship, is that synergy back and forth. You give, I give, you give.
That's what I'm saying. I don't think that's selfish, man. I think that's just you having high standards of yourself and the people that you surround yourself with.
Yeah. I mean, you said it best, just before, where it's like, if you really think about it, like, relationships as a whole are, like, they're very, very complex. Yeah. Very complex. And especially, and they're very dynamic. They're always changing. It'll never be the same, And now we're going to bring in, okay, what kind of relationship is this? This is, friends, family, professional. I mean, the list can go on and on. Yes. With all of that said, what kind of role you think social media can kind of play in regards to having a toxic relationships? I mean, how much do you think social media should play as a factor in your relationships? So let's say, for example, here's a good example for you. You make plans with someone. Okay. They say, yeah, Saj, I'll be, at XYZ at 5 p.m. 5 p.m. rolls around. You go, Jack, where are you, bro? It's like, oh, I'm so sick, dude. I apologize. Like, I have the flu. I'm throwing up. And then you look at my Instagram story at 8 p.m. and I'm actually at a Drake concert. And I'm having a
well, that's not even social media. Social media is basically your is your rat. It just ratted you out. But the reality is, that's just a shitty lying person, man. Okay. I would just cut him out.
You would just cut him out easy.
For me, it's how often do toxic patterns reveal themselves to me?
Often, typically. It's just whether you see it.
No, it's just whether you overlook it and where you choose to ignore it, whether you think that it's not that big of a deal. For me and you, with people that we know within our circles or just people that we deal with and interact with, when we see a pattern, me and you, we call it out. We identify it. We're like, yo, do you notice that? Whatever it is. You know what I'm saying? But our social awareness, our self-awareness makes us do that because we keep ourselves at that standard. So with that's the thing. Social media and technology, and I think the reality is I think the vanity aspect is my biggest problem. Okay. Yeah. And I think that is, unfortunately, we're caught up in that storm too. There's a little bit of that in everything, because that's just the world we're in.
Unfortunately, yeah.
It doesn't help for sure.
So, as we start to kind of wrap up here, one of the last things that I wanted to really address, because, to be honest, this is one of the most important ones, is, like, you've experienced, a very toxic relationship, whether it was personal, whether it was, professional. You had an old boss that, didn't treat you well, didn't talk well to you, and now your self-confidence has been diminished, and, whatever the scenario is. What are, in your mind, some steps or some things, or really just advice, anything that you can give to our audience here in regards to kind of recovering and what that, come up or comeback looks like from experiencing a toxic relationships. In essence, not letting that bad experience affect some of the newer ones that you'll have throughout your life.
A few things. I mean, we're talking about healing, recovery, wrap up. From toxic relationships, if you're on the damaging end, if you're someone that's been hurt, that's dealt with that, and your goal is to kind of improve, I think very simple, right? We are not meant to deal with our burdens alone. That's just the way I see things.
Okay.
And I am guilty of this because by nature, I don't share a lot. I don't share a lot of the difficult things that I deal with every day, whether it's with relationships or anything. Even with like family, I don't share a lot, but I should be. I recognize that I should be. I recognize that, seeking therapy, joining support groups, whatever it is that you need, just opening up in general to maybe a trusted friend can make all the difference in the world. But that's the thing, man. People don't understand that, is that you're not on your own, and I think there's so much taboo, so much nonsense surrounding the idea of seeking help, just if you're on the negative side of something, and you don't know how, or you're not equipped to handle it, sometimes it's just good to be able to, if let's say you're close to your mom, go talk to your mom and be like, yo, this is what happened, because sometimes people can kind of see things that you don't see.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's healing isn't linear.
Well said. Yeah, well said. Yeah. I mean, for me, I think that like displaying empathy towards that person that, let's say, has hurt you, and you have to understand, like, hurt people.
Yes.
So although in a lot of different situations that might be very, very tough to do, I think like you need to, because just because John hurt you doesn't mean that Jeff will. And you don't want that relationship that you've had with John to impact the one you'll have with Jeff, because the one with Jeff could be absolutely fantastic, the best one that you've had ever, I want
to add to that, because that just reminded me something. I've seen a lot of people go down the same path numerous times, and they just don't learn. Yeah. One friend screws you over, disrespects you, treats you like shit.
Yeah.
Another friend does the same thing. You're letting it happen. Yeah. You're the one to blame. Yeah. Like, as harsh as that sounds. Yeah. You are the only person that is to blame. Unless those friends are holding a gun to your head and treating you like shit in a basement and locking you down in chains, you're free. Cut them out. Leave. Walk.
Some people are scared to do that though, because they'll be alone. Want to address that? Because that's very real. That's real stuff. Very, very real. But the reality is, this life is too short, man. And I'm not trying to be profound or anything, but the reality is, this life is too short for you to be surrounded by toxic, uncomfortable, difficult situations that are just not going to make you happy. Sometimes you just have to make the tough decision, be selfish, and make the best call for yourself. Yep. I would completely agree with that.
A lot of people are not selfish enough sometimes. You just got to be. You got to take care of you. If you want other people to take care of you in a good way, in a relationship, you got to take care of you first.
Yeah, I mean, and to build on that, you can't help someone else if you need help.
Correct.
You need to be able to help yourself first, and then, you can, help whoever you'd like to.
Oh yeah.
So I think as we wrap up here, as always, hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It's a little bit on the deep end, but comment, like, subscribe, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you can find a podcast, you will find Venture Hustles, and we'll see you next time.
Adios.
Yeah, venture hustles, life is really what you make it. Building up your brand is whatever you create it. Really ain't no limit. You just gotta love it. Working day and night, it's all about the venture hustle. Hey, venture hustles. Time to take it to the next level. Let's go.